Hi, let's talk about game design. In particular, let's talk about how to design solutions to problems that you're having with your game. Hi, I'm Mike, and welcome to my channel where I like to talk about games and game design. And today, I wanted to talk to you about how I go through the process of designing solutions to problems that I'm finding with my current project. Now, I'm not talking about how to track down bugs or fix unintended behaviors. Specifically, I'm going to be focusing on how to approach a design to a solution to a system or something that was implemented properly, but you're getting a lot of feedback either from yourself or from playtesters that something just isn't quite right. So this video is going to be broken down into two halves. The first half is I'm going to be talking about the steps that I go through kind of on their own. I'll give you a couple of examples, and then the second half of the video will be me taking these steps and applying them to a very specific problem that I am currently facing with my current game project, which is the working title Bear Friend. So if you're interested, stick around and let's get into it. Okay, so let's talk about steps to design solutions to problems that you're facing. The first step is to identify the problem. It sounds kind of silly when you say it straight out like that, but correctly identifying the problem you're about to try to solve is incredibly important and can save you a lot of time if you do it correctly, but it can also be harder than it sounds. For example, let's say you're getting feedback about how your character's movement feels slow, so let's increase the movement speed. But then, in this hypothetical situation, you start getting feedback that the character is moving too fast now, or that it feels too hard to control in some situations. Maybe you add something like a slowdown or a sprint button to toggle between 5 movement and speed. Or if you already had a sprint button, now you have to implement a new button to map to controls to slow the player down. And then you need to tell the player that that button exists and how it works. And with all of that done, have you now solved the original problem of the character's movement feeling too slow? Maybe. It's actually kind of hard to know because we didn't really figure out why the slow movement was a problem in the first place. Maybe players were having trouble moving out of the range of enemy attacks. So the solution might not be to change the player's movement speed at all. Maybe it's the hitboxes that were off and the players were getting hit when they shouldn't be. Or maybe the attack animations are too fast and you're not giving the player enough warning or time to get out of the way. Or maybe enemies are attacking too quickly and players can't get back in to retaliate in time. Maybe players are saying the movement is too slow because they're getting bored traveling between points of interest. Maybe you need to add more points of interest or more things to do along the way. Maybe shorten the distance between them. Maybe they're backtracking more often than you intended because they're getting lost. This could be a good chance to revisit your level design or maybe improve your navigational tools or UI. Or maybe it really is that the character was just moving too slowly, so increasing the speed was in fact the correct solution. But if you don't stop to consider why you're getting the feedback or why these things are problems, you might end up spending a lot of time working on a solution to something that isn't the real problem. How do you know when you've identified the right problem? Unfortunately, that's kind of hard to know. But as a start, try to keep asking yourself the question, why? Until you get frustrated with your inner 5-year-old and answer, because it is. I find that's usually a good place to start for me, but also keep in mind that step 3 will have us coming back to redefine the problem if our solutions don't work. So you'll get multiple chances at this. All right, step 2, use paper. Use paper to design a few solutions. Now I say use paper, but really what I mean is to think through a few possible solutions and make notes. Thinking through solutions on paper is faster than trying to make them work in code, so you can iterate through solutions that don't quite work a little bit faster until you have a solid plan for something that you'd like to try implementing to see if that actually fixes the problem. The notes are important, at least for me, for later, so when I come back to this step, I can see what I've already tried and what has worked or what hasn't worked. It's also useful to have these notes on hand for if you run into similar issues in the future, you can look back and see how you've already tried to solve similar problems. Step 3, test as soon as possible. So once you're happy with your proposed solution on paper, you're going to want to be able to test it as soon as possible. So when you start to implement your design solution, Don't worry too much about proper coding or keeping things super tidy. A little bit of a look ahead. Step 4 is to clean it up. But the goal of step 3 is to be able to test your solution as soon as possible to see if it actually fixes the problem like you thought it would. If the problem persists, or there are too many new problems introduced by a solution, you're going to want to go back to step 1 to redefine the problem with what you've learned. And if it turns out that you don't change your problem definition, you're going to have to go back and reevaluate and come up with new designs for solutions. And all that's going to take time. So the faster you can get through one iteration, the faster you can get to the best solution. And finally, step 4, clean it up. If you were focused on getting something tested, and if you're doing multiple iterations to find the best solution, you're going to have made a mess and written some sloppy code. It may seem alright now because you've just been working on it and everything is fresh in your memory, but when you inevitably come back to it, for example, if you want to steal it for a future project, you're very unlikely to remember what everything is. And you'll need to spend time trying to decipher it again in order to reuse, tweak, and optimize it. Now, I'm not going to lie, this cleanup is my least favorite part of problem solving. I find it tedious and time consuming, but I also find it even more tedious and frustrating to try and decipher old code to try to fix something that doesn't work. As a side note, optimization is not the purpose of this step. Optimization is the potential solution to a problem that you may or may not actually run into. So make sure it's clear and human readable so that if you do need to optimize in the future, you can come back, see what you've done, understand it quickly, and be able to start designing the optimizations that you require for this piece of code. And that's it. That's it for the steps that I take when I solve problems. Now, let's walk through an example of how I apply these steps to try to fix issues that I'm having with my current project, BearFriend. If you've seen it, I mentioned in my first devlog that one thing that I wanted to fix was the camera. The camera zips around too fast, and I can't get it to look at what I want to look at, and overall it just feels uncontrollable and very frustrating to use. Alright, let's define the problem. Let's start with the statement I just made. The camera is uncontrollable. Well, that's not literally true. There are controls and it moves around freely, so that's not a very good problem definition. Let's try again. I also said that the camera is frustrating to use. Alright, why is that a problem? Well, it's a problem because frustrating is bad. Okay, not a why question, so we'll use a what question. What makes it frustrating to use? The camera moves too fast. Why is that causing you frustration? Because I can't look at what I want to look at. What is it that you want to look at? I want to watch BearFriend wander around doing her thing, and I want to see things that are happening around the island, and kind of the island itself. Okay, so if we take all of that into account, the problem we're trying to solve is, how do we make it easier to watch BearFriend do her thing and also see the island? Step 2, think through some solutions. Alright, possible solution number 1. We can just reduce the camera speed and add a sprint button to go between fast and slow speeds. That seems like a pretty straightforward and simple solution that would certainly make it easier to see what's going on. But you know what would make it even easier? Make the camera follow the bear. Alright, possible solution number 2. Make a follow camera and have it follow BearFriend. Okay, that would certainly make it easier to watch BearFriend, but how does that let us see what's going on the island? Well, we could also add points of interest around the island and have the camera follow that static location. It would have the added benefit of only needing to really focus on certain areas of the island to really dress up, which would probably cut down on development time as well. Okay, let's see if we can come up with the third one. Possible solution number 3. Make a first-person camera and make it feel like you're living on the island with the BearFriend. I don't think that really would solve the problem of making it easier to watch BearFriend doing her thing and seeing the island as a whole. It's going to change the way that the camera controls and the camera feels, and it's going to introduce a lot more mechanics that players are going to expect from feeling like they're living in the world with BearFriend, and that's not really the direction that I envision this game going. So while I think that might be an interesting idea for a different game, I don't think it's going to work for this particular project, at least not at this point in development. So it comes down to either solution 1 or solution 2, and I think solution 2 is the stronger option, even though it will take a little bit more work. I think the benefits of limiting where the player camera focuses are going to be worth it. I also think that it's so different from what is currently implemented, I'll just make a new camera controller to do this. So if it doesn't work and players do want the ability to roam around freely, I can always slide this old one back in with some tweaked numbers to make it easier to fly around the island. So we're going to move forward with solution number 2, which is to create a follow camera and add points of interest around the island. So before I start coding, I also like to set out specific requirements for things that I need, so I have a checklist to come back to as I'm coding. So let's set out some requirements for what the camera needs to do in order to solve the problem that we defined earlier. So 1, the camera needs to be able to follow moving targets. 2, the camera needs to be able to zoom in and out. Also, the camera needs to be able to rotate around, tilt up and down to get a better view of the focused target. 3, the camera needs to be able to change what it's focusing on. And 4, the camera needs to be able to move quickly between focused targets. So that seems like a solid list of requirements. I'm going to go ahead and dive into the code and see if we can get it working. The first thing I do is I review my previous camera setup to see if I can reuse any of the code or the scene itself. Then I create a new 3D scene with the camera node as the child of a generic spatial node. This way I can move the camera along its z-axis to control the distance to the follow target, and I'm free to treat that spatial node as a pivot point and rotate it and move it around more freely. I've decided not to reuse the code from my previous camera because it was written before I'd really gotten the hang of Godot, and the changes that I wanted to make to its functionality mean that I would be rewriting most of it anyway. I'm creating a simple test scene in order to make sure that the camera controls are functioning correctly before I add it to the main scene, where there's a lot more going on and it may be harder to diagnose any issues that are happening. After several attempts, I've landed on some controls that feel good in this scene and behave the way I expect, so it's time to replace the camera in the main Bear Island scene. And there we have it. So far, I really like the way this new camera feels. It gives me enough different views of the island and follows Bear Friend around. There are a few improvements I think can be made. For example, I want to set up a default camera zoom level for each of the different points of interest, so I don't have to keep zooming in and out when I change focus between them. But as a general proof of concept, I really like this change. So I hope you found this look at my problem-solving process interesting and useful. And if you've made it this far in the video, I would very much appreciate it if you could do the usual YouTube stuff of, liking and subscribing, leave a comment if you have any questions, and I'll be back with another video soon. Until then, good luck with your projects. See you around.